And we are live. Good evening, everyone. And tonight I am very excited. We are talking about Druids tradition. Now, the Druids are it's more than just belonging to a certain country. They can often be associated with England, but really they were cultural icons, meaning that the culture being went all the way to France and Belgium and all the way to Ireland and to Scotland. All right. So it was way, way, way beyond just a simple small area. A way to describe Druid was it was the equivalent of a shaman. Right. So they're the keeper of the wisdom. They're the keeper of the traditions. They're the keeper of all holistic medicine. They also play a role in how society is being ruled, how it was economically exchanged from one area to the other, and they were keeping the peace. So when the Romans came and decided to associate them solely to a religious belief system and eliminated them, they eliminated much more than just a faith. They eliminated an entire system of functioning, which is why Rome was so hell-bent on destroying them. Because if you know a little bit of history, in Rome, there was a lot of pagan. So you have to ask yourself then why, when they met the Druid, was it so important to destroy them? It was because of the very great influence and absolute power that the Druids held over several areas that the Romans were interested in. And they were the link that kept the tribe strong. And without them, all of a sudden the tribes are lost. So imagine that you always have a conversation, and with the people that you're talking, there's always a mediator present. A mediator that you respect, someone that you honor, and so someone you listen to, someone you consider. Very much like the native tribes where we have the group of elders. Right? So even though you may have strong opinion, because you're in the front of the group of elders, you will show respect. You will work your turn to speak. But without their calming influence and their wisdom and experience, then all of a sudden it was a whole lot of hot flash characters and impulsivity, creating more chaos and make it easy for Rome to conquer all these countries. The Druid tradition is a very ancient and was supposedly an oral tradition. Now, any of you here read Asterix growing up? No, I'm Asterix, yes. Yeah. So, Panoramix is the big druid, and he makes the special magic potion. And it was interesting because in the film that just came out, he's looking for a new apprentice, and they're like, "Oh, hang on, we have notes." And he says, "Oh, notes? How come we make notes? We don't keep written records." It's like, "Yeah, we're all getting old, buddy, and we're forgetting things." So I thought it was funny on a twist that there is some kind of a written communication between Druids. But for the most part, everything was memorized by heart, by rote. Which again, it's part of the shamanic tradition. It took a very long time because you had to learn everything, and you couldn't afford a mistake. You couldn't forget if this valerian plant was good for fever or not, or was it poisonous if it was ingested, but only to be applied topically. And there's so much information, and because you couldn't make notes and because you couldn't write anything down, it had to be repeated over and over and over until you finally learned it. So to become a Druid was a lifelong journey. It wasn't something you undertook for a year or two and then moved on to something else, or it was literally a life commitment when you entered in the tradition of the White Brotherhood. In honor of the White Brotherhood, I am wearing the white dress today. So we know the most famous Druid of them all would be, any guess? Merlin, from the Legend of Arthur. Why was he famous? Because Merlin, raising an actual apprentice, was able to impart the wisdom that they learn as Druids. And then allowing this man, outside of the influence of the Druids, to reunify England and to work together against the conquerors, which were the Romans. The reason why Arthur was such a good political king is because he had learned the wisdom first. And he honored the people and he was very loyal. But this all came from his teaching, which we will explore tonight. The idea of that culture was very, very much tied in with the land. And we're going to see tonight there's many, many parallels between Native American and what happened in the Druid tradition, which is why I can make that connection between the two. In every country all over the world, there is, if you go past the modern medical medicine, there is a way that people healed. And that way was always, now you can call it the witch doctor, you can call it a shaman, you can call him a druid, but there was always these wise people that dedicated their entire life to helping the community grow and stay healthy. Druid actually is translated to oakmen. They were known to be part of trees. They were very connected to the forest. And in a way, they could communicate with the trees. They were close enough to their abilities to have that level of communication. There's no surviving records, obviously, but there is, mixed into the legend of Arthur, a lot of information about Morgan Le Fay, right? These other worldly beings that are occupying the same space. And that is part of the tradition of the Druids. It speaks of, in their stories, of the wild hunt and the king of the hunt and the guardians of the forest, which are elementals. So when they would create a story, it was only not to be entertaining, but to try and help their apprentice remember important things. And that was the easiest way, isn't it? Because a story is logical. It usually has a beginning, it has a plot, it has a middle, it has an end. And so if you can memorize the story, then you remember the steps of what it is, what you have to do. There are 3 books known as describing the tradition of the Druids. There's the Book of Feilit, which is mostly the book that we will work with tonight. There's the Corcan of Meldru, which is more the medicinal area of the book. And then there's the Song of the Forest Trees, which was solely the property of the bards. Now, again, if we go back to Asterix, the bard is not very much appreciated because he's too revolutionary in his music. But the music that I'm going to demonstrate later tonight, you can actually still to this day hear the music. The music, you can't expect a tradition of people. It would be like for us at Christmas, right? Are we going to ever forget "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," right? We all know that song. If you start singing that song, everybody could join in, yes? In the same way, the Song of the Forest Trees were songs that were recited for these 8 typical holidays throughout the year. And so they were songs that were sung on those holidays over and over and over in every village that shared this culture and this heritage. So the songs have survived. And at the time, they weren't necessarily had any words associated with them. It was more to convey a mood or to elevate or to make you feel more in tune and connecting more to nature and connecting with each other as well. But with time, like one of these songs is Danny Boy. Right? But now we're going to understand, what does Danny Boy truly mean? Why is that song so sad, really? It's about letting go and all that. So we're going to cover that tonight. The tradition was entrusted to the priesthood of the Druids from the lost civilization of Hyperborea. Hyperborea is very old. It's a race of people that lived in a not so solid form as we do. And when there was less fog and there were more sunlight and things became more solid, they actually went underground to live. There's Hyperborean cities still to this day that exist. Now, in one of my future talks, I'm actually going to be covering people like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and I'm going to explain that these people actually managed to stumble, just like Alice in Wonderland, into these places that none of us think actually exist, but actually do. Next week, for example, we're going to be starting on that journey because I'm going to take you to Telos and Mount Shasta, and we're going to talk about the people that live under that mountain. Right? Hyperborean were originally from that area and have established themselves below the ground. They are the one that were carrying the wisdom from Atlantis, which had then been modified with Egypt and Greece to the present day of the Song of the Trees. This is before Jesus Christ, when this book was created, if you will, and it was passed over to the priesthood. Now, everything in the of sometimes all you see is just the tree leaf shaped that are binded together, but that is the symbols for the Druids. They believe the number 3 to be the divine number. Why? Because it's the divine will, the divine love, and the divine wisdom. Yes, and that is what creates the God entity. Contrary to what people might think, the Druids believe that in one God. And all of the faces of the God that you see in the stories were just different faces. And that's easy to understand because in some cases, you know, there's, if I just take myself, I'm a certain way when I was wearing a police uniform and I went to work. And I was a different person because I couldn't hug people and I couldn't, you know, I couldn't be me. I was wearing a mask. I was wearing the mask of a police officer. And then, you know, there's the one that you wear with your family. And then there's the one that you wear with your friends. In some cases, some people are not free to be themselves and their family. They're too constrained by rules, regulation, and having to be something they're not. So in the same way, we can just take one trait of God and just explore it inside of a story. And that's where all these different gods come from. But all and be all, they believe that all of them are one God. So that now changes our aspect of what we thought about Druid maybe originally as a pagan religion. They're a lot more closer to Christianity than we might have thought. They were just more tied to the land. That was the main difference, I would say. Now, amongst other things, one of the way to see, if you want to recognize a Druid site, when we go to Ireland, you would be looking for 3 rays. So 3 lines coming down from heaven to earth. One of them is capped with gold. So it might be painted yellow. So these are the things you might want to look for, yes? And that's the sun and the male energy of the representation of the Trinity of God. The other one will be caped with silver or painted gray. And this is the representation of the feminine, of this energy that comes down from the moon. And the one in the middle is black. Why is it black? Because it's the unknown. It's what lies in between. And where do we fit in this space, in the in between? So all of this actually has, they've found a connotation of Pythagoras. You know, the guy with the triangles, the laws of Pythagoras, the guy that found all these mathematical equations. He lived before the Battle of the Trees, and he was an initiate in Egypt, in India, and Asia. And this man is the one who brought the song spells to the priesthood of the Druids. Right? Not quite what we might have thought. So if you think the Druids were too dumb to know how to write, actually they didn't. They were able to read Greek. So it's not that they were dumb. It's what they considered their teaching to be sacred and were keeping these information for the initiate only. With Pythagoras, they understood the power of music and of frequency. So if you if you pay attention to the 8 songs I'm going to name later, you have to then try to listen to them at home to see how is this frequency affecting me. Just like next week, we're going to talk about the different rays of light in the week and how you can use these energy to help your meditation on a daily basis. In the same way, with the change of the season, to prepare your energy for the next period of the year, to stay bonded to the land, these songs were meant to readjust your frequency so you could move from one season to the other without difficulty. Now, why is this important? Just think, we're in Vancouver. It rains a lot, not much sun. And I, for one, am deeply affected by this lack of sunlight. So I think I get a pretty depressed mood knowing that the rain is coming. And then I get, not very long after that, this depressing, it's gray again. Yes. However, it's a theory we're going to test this year. We're going to be listening to this music to readjust these frequencies, to allow our body to prepare for this change. And so our change is not, our body knowing the change is coming and adjusting our frequency means that we have the expectancy of less sunlight and we should transition easily. Not cool? And that's the reason for the celebration. And all of this came from Pythagoras and his mathematical calculation and everything that he did. So the first Druid, the very, very first man that obtained this book and started the Order of the Brotherhood of the White Robes was called Meldru. And the highest of all instruments, the most respected musician in the Druid tradition is the singer, the one who masters his voice, the one who does need anything outside of himself to be able to raise your vibration only by sound. Again, a very shamanic thing to do. Now, Meldru added his own personal knowledge of manifestation, creation, and healing in the Gorkan of Meldru, which eventually became almost the Bible for the Druid tradition. So it's a tradition of earth. It's a tradition linked to the planet, the change of season, right? You're very close to the land. And that is why when they build monuments, they build them out of stones. So dolmens, which are usually 2 stones with a megalithic stone on top, or menhir, which is just a standalone stone, were meant to point important geographical area where events are taking place at depending on the time of the year. They were representative of vortexes or of places where the veil between world is thinnest. Now, we're going to see later that there's 2 times of the year where the veil between worlds or dimension is the thinnest. However, outside of those times of the year, you can also find locations where the veil is thinnest. And so you can access the other side at any time of the year. Pretty cool, right? So that's why there's all these stone markings. And these stone markings go all the way into France and Belgium. So they're not just Stonehenge. Even in England, close to Stonehenge, there's Avebury, which has a huge stone circle. And there's plenty of them in Ireland, which we'll visit. They also mark water well as healing wells, but they are usually considered sacred. So the Druids, wanting to respect Mother Earth, didn't build big churches or big buildings. And it's ludicrous to think that they didn't know how to build things. They just tried to build things more conforming to what nature would look like. And so it wouldn't disturb the aesthetic of Mother Nature. It would not change or destroy the environment in which they lived in. Yeah. Now, the number 3 also represents the past, the present, and the future. The Druids were very much able to live in the now, but they also understand the importance of history. And so history was passed down as part of the learning. Because how can you not repeat your mistakes? if you don't have the wisdom of the past and you don't know what's been done before, right? I often say, why reinvent the wheel? It's there, it's working. Until there's an issue, unless you want to go without wheels, then, just go with the wheel. And, but that's because we have the wheel. We know how to use it, yeah? And as far as the future go, they were planners. So they were always trying to make sure that their crops would grow the next year. They would try to give a break to the land. They would try to ensure the planning is in place so that everybody from year to year have everything they need. But mostly, they believe in imbalances. They were strong proponent to putting people out of balance because they felt that if you're too safe and you're too secure, then you most likely will just stagnate and not move forward in your life. So they taught their apprentices and everybody else who would listen that change is the key to growth. So rather than expecting the worst and being miserable about it, they would boost people's confidence by saying, "Ooh, that's wonderful. There's an opportunity for growth for you. What will you do?" Right? So it's a very different way of looking at life. And they would point out that nature is in constant change. Right? In the spring, you see the plants come out, and then from day to day, you see them grow, you see them expand, you see the flowers, and then the flowers die, and yet, is it dead? Not really. I'll grow back next spring. It shows us the normal cycle of nature. Being close to nature was a way to understand life. So all of their metaphors, all of their story relate to Mother Nature and how the function of nature applies to our lives. Amongst those places that they found, and some of you, you may wonder, how did they find these vortex of energy? And it's not hard. It's really not hard because you can feel these energies. So now the secret is to ask yourself, is this place only for the summer solstice? And is it open only for 24 hours? Or is this present all year round? But once they identified powerful sites, they would mark them as holy centers. And the Druids weren't the only one doing this. This is where the Incas and the Maya and the Aztecs, that's how they build their cities, their temples. They find the energetic places and specifically reserve that spot for manifestation, which is really truly prayer. So that people can use the extra abundant energy to increase their power in what they're trying to manifest. And it's often also, and this is interesting, the Christianity was often built on old temple sites because they understood the energy. They wouldn't use that word anymore, right? But it was more than the people wouldn't have come to a church that was not built on an energetic place. But if you're going to destroy their place and you're going to put a church on top of it, then it was easy for them to come and pray to these locations because they understood the power was behind the location. That it's a temple, Inca temple, or that it's a monastery or a cathedral, didn't matter. And really, how could you tell who they were praying to while they were praying inside their heads? Yes? So, the stone circles were first created in Ireland by the priest of the Tuatha De Danann. Those are the direct descendants of Atlantis. We will be on what's called Tara Hill during our trip. And this hill is one of that the high priest has first founded. So the energy there is good all year round. Now, other sites that were important and key were Stonehenge in England, the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the Great Oracles of Delphi. Why would the oracles be set in a specific place? Because the energy made it really easy. That's one of the locations where any time of the year, the veil is the tiniest. So it's easy to connect to the other side and get answers. Okay? We'll find those spots in Ireland as well. which will be very exciting. Now, these passages are also known to often have secret entrances and secret passages, leading to caches of knowledge. One such cache was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Near around the Dead Sea. I don't know what they were digging for. I can't remember that. But they excavated all these books that had been preserved. The same thing is all over those energetic sites. Because they have the energy, they believed that they would preserve things better. And because they were considered sacred sites, they figured even if they would trash the top of the building and rebuild something on top of it, what was below ground was always going to remain safe and protected. So if you're looking for real treasures, you gotta go dig under these places. So now, specifically with Ireland, they are the direct descendants of the Hyperboreans, those who decide to solidify and remain on the top side of the planet. They're also one of the very few culture race on this planet that's DNA is the purest. And the reason for that is because, just think, you have the European, they're invading in Jerusalem, and then the Turks are coming over, they're invading here. We're North America, the white man is coming, and then we have the Spanish coming, and everybody's mating with each other, willingly or not willingly, kids in shoe, and the race is not pure anymore, right? We're all mixing up these genes. Everything is a mixed match of everything. However, Ireland, because of its specific location and the fact that it grows rocks, literally, people would invade Ireland from time to time and then realize this is just an ugly rock, and they would leave and have very, very little influence on the creation of a mixed race. So it is the race that is considered the purest on the planet. And that's why the red hair and the curlies are so strong there. All right. Now, there's been less fighting in that area as well. I'm not saying there hasn't been any, but there has been a lot less. This, as in fact, affects the land. And so the energy of the land is not as, requires much healing as other places on the planet, with a lot of killing and a lot of blood seeped into the ground. And for the longest times, because of the influence of the Druids, they were living outside of the greed and the corruption. Now, the Druids were able to astrally project themselves, meaning that their physical body would stay in one place, but they could travel to other places. And many of those places exist in Ireland still today. In order to identify the different locations or the different doors. Now, for those of you who have taken classes with me, I often say you will cross through the portal where you recognize the symbol. And I don't know how many people pay actually attention to the symbols that are engraved on the door. I mean by that going one way, we're going to an island. Coming the other way, we're coming to wherever we are. So the symbol engraved on the door is me, is my symbol. For traveling to Avalon, it would have been a silver apple. To traveling to Stonehenge, it would have been another symbol. So the use of symbol instead of language, made it easy for anybody from any culture to recognize silver apple Avalon, right? As opposed to having it, let's say, in writing, and then you have to decipher which language is that in. Because remember, the culture of Druids was spread throughout Europe, not just the Great Britain. So there was French mixed in there was Spanish mixed in there was all these languages. And that's why they use symbol above language. Now, the White Brotherhood was recognized as wise, as having sovereign power, meaning leadership qualities. They were held in high honor. They had authority over peace and war. You needed their permission to fight. And that's how much respect they portrayed in their culture. Just think about it. right? So it's a little like today, you could have someone in Canada that's pissed off, I don't know, someone in Australia, and they say, I want to go to war, and everybody's going to go, yeah, sit in your own corner. We don't think that's good enough reason for us to go to war, so we're not going. And it was a lot like that. So it prevented a lot of trifle battle, a lot of useless deaths, and made everything more peaceful. They were extremely knowledgeable in healing and astronomy, and that's what Stone Age is all about. Stone Age is a mathematical area, is a geographically identifying the different phases of moons and stars, and it wasn't a religious area. Avebury was the more religious fate ceremonies being held there. The other one was more about astronomy and times of the year and preparation for celebrations. They distributed the learning, the apprenticeship, into 21 rungs on the ladder. Now, obviously, it wasn't for your physical body to go up a ladder. That would have been too easy. It's something that required you to learn the 21 lessons of Merlin. Yes, the 21 lesson was for the spirit to climb. So how does our spirit climb anywhere? Our spirit climbs with self-confidence. Our spirit climbs with autonomy. Our spirit climbs with compassion. And those are the different lessons that were included in those 20 rungs ladder. Eventually, there was 3 intermediary quests for mastery. So you have to master meditation. You have to master self-control, meaning you can't let your fear get the best of you. Why was that so important? Why would we need to understand why we can't just succumb to our fears? Because that's when irrational decisions are made. That's when people go to war, And so they were put in situations that were terrifying, like spending the night in the dark in a forest, and you're like 12. And, there's all these strange noise and everything. They don't know that they're being watched. They don't know that nothing will be allowed to happen to them. But meanwhile, they don't know that. It's very similar to one of the training that the Egyptian had. The apprentice had to swim into a dark hole and find his way, and he didn't know how long he would be underwater, and he didn't know if he was going to make it to the other end, and had to confront their fear. And it's always done through darkness, because when are we the most afraid? In the unknown. When we don't know what's coming at us, when we don't know what's going to happen next. You can't control that. It's impossible because you don't know. But you can control yourself. You can learn to have faith and trust, and you can learn to rely on yourself. And that was the idea behind those 3 quests. There's different ways for us to accomplish that. And again, next week, there's a different possibility. That doesn't imply that you have to spend a dark night in the forest alone. But that was their way. A lot of the older traditions were asking these things because of the dark night of the heart. So I'll cover that in a minute. But the Celtic culture, or the Druidic culture, was filled, therefore, with imagery, symbolism, and double meaning. So nothing was ever completely simple or outright that out of something only one thing would come out. The idea that there's a message embedded in the message, which required introspection on the part of the apprentice. So they weren't meant to learn everything and some right away, and sometimes it meant them going back over what they had walked and examine it again from a different perspective, now that they were older, or now that they had gained some wisdom and experience. It's funny because, I have 3 kids, and one of them had to practice soccer, and his attitude, well, I know how to play it, why should I practice? And I said, well, so you could be good at it. It's but I am good. Right? It's like, yes, you are. You're wonderful. However, you have to learn to play with others. It can't just be you on the field. And you won't learn that cooperation unless you actually practice the cooperation. So really, you're not practicing soccer. You're practicing cooperation. You're practicing communication. You're practicing all of these other skills that you can't do on your own. So the Druids try to make it easy, and they took apprenticeships of future Druids, and they cut them into 8 sections. Each of the section goes with the rotations of the year. Because they were very close to Mother Earth, they figured that these moments were key moments in someone's life. And so everything is now attached to these. Interestingly enough, that would take the look of the medicine wheel. Very much like the native way that we journey from one direction to the other. In the same way, the Druid apprentices were traveling through the different times of the year and learning this perspective of that season and using their knowledge, because the knowledge is the same, but using it from that perspective of that season. What are those seasons? What are those times of the year? We'll start with February 1st. February 1st, and they're looking at this wheel as a continuous perpetual cycle that you redo every year, but also the beginning. So February 1st was also considered the period of infancy from 0 to 7. It's called Imbolc. And I apologize to all your Celtic speaking out there. Probably not pronouncing it properly, but you'll forgive me, yes. The second holiday after that is the equinox in March 21st. This one is called the Alban Healer. And that covers the reception of the wisdom, which happens between the years of 7 to 14. Then the Beltane on May 1st. Beltane is known as a time of fertility. And so it's called the times of the lovers, 14 to 21. To non-pagan eyes, this holiday is considered an orgy, because people would openly have fires and jump over fires and then eventually make out all over the fields, right? But they didn't see sexuality with shame. They didn't see sexuality with all the connotation that Christianity had to sex. And so they had more freedom to explore and to experience the love. And then we go to the summer solstice on June 21st, which was Alban Effen. Alban Effen was the expression of self, which happens between the years of 20 to 30. In the Celtic tradition, you were still considered a young adult by the age of 30. Having a son who's 26, I agree. I tend to agree. There's still things that I'm like, yeah, he's growing up, but he's not quite there yet. You know, I can see that. I can see, but he is coming into his own. He is now establishing his own ideas and opinion. He's now learned, experienced different ideas, and now he's making it his own. That's the idea between that one. And then you have Lugnasad on August 1st. On this holiday, it represented the family time from 30 to 50. And that's when they were expected to have families. So they weren't expected to have children at the very young age. So contrary to what we might think, it wasn't kids making out in the woods in the fires of Beltane. It's adults that are ready for family. And then we go to the fall of equinox on September 21st, which is the time of recollection, which is 50 to 70. And if you look at people that are between 50, what are we starting to say? At 50, oh, I remember when, yes? Because it's no longer a time of adventure. It's no longer a time of making things and building things. It's a time to reflect on those things that you have done and you have built. And share this wisdom that you're accumulating. This is Alban Elvd. And then the last one is Samhain. Samhain is November 1st, Halloween. Yes, the day after Halloween. And the 2 times of the year when the veil is the thinnest is Samhain, which is close to Halloween, and Beltane. Those are the 2 times that you can easily cross the veil, communicate with the other side, and have visions and all of those things. Samhain represents old age and death. And, you know, November 1st is the Day of the Dead. in Mexico. So isn't this interesting how all of these things are related around these same times of the year across cultures, and yet, you know, I can't imagine a Druid that have traveled to Mexico and brought back to Europe saying, you know, this day in Mexico is called the Day of the Dead, so we're going to call it that day. You know, they had a knowing, they had wisdom that we seem to have neglected for a very long time, and this is why I'm re-examining these cultures and these extremely important cultures with you when I do these talks, so that you understand that we're so much more united than we think. We're so much more linked and connected than we think we are. And this is how we see the connection. We have to look at the very basic of the culture. So it was the time of the ancestors, a time to communicate those that have passed on and preparing those that are about to move forward for the next step in their journey. So obviously these 8 dates, we recognize them. Yes, we know these dates. They're not unknown to us. They were celebrated as festivals. So there was basically 8 holidays. If we look at the holidays that we have in our culture today, well, we have Christmas, right? So Christmas would be the equivalent of December 21st, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. So I was missing December 21st on here. And the celebration, you will realize, is a lot more pagan than Christian when I start describing how these 8 days of the year were celebrated. So they're marking the change in the sun, right? So longer day, shorter day, midday of the year, these dates. And they're 4 cross quarters. So in between those days. Why is those days so important? Because they were important for harvesting, planting, all of these details as well. So the festival would be the mark of either the end of the planting, the end of the laboring in the fields, and people came together. And after working together, they celebrated together. So the year actually began on Samhain, on October 31st. It's the night of the wild hunt. So there was a particular mastery that an apprentice could achieve on that night. To summarize it, that's the one where you have to go into the forest, and I don't even think you have a lantern with you, and you have to finish your quest by morning. And whatever comes, comes. And they strongly believed that fog was a portal to the next world, and they strongly believed that you could definitely come face to face with people that had passed on and deliver messages to you. So it might not have been a long journey, but it definitely could have been a very emotional journey as you're facing these people and learning from them. It's the night of the year, like I said before, that the veil is the tiniest. And the custom was to build bonfires, to have apple games, which makes sense because it's the fall, the apples are available, to wear frightening costumes and do pumpkin carving. Wonder who does that nowadays? Everybody, right? So we have continued their tradition, not even knowing where they came from. The food for the celebration was apple, root and vine vegetables, so squash, potatoes, parsnip, carrots, turnips. And the incense they used at that time of the year was wormwood, nightshade, ghost flower, and applewood fire. And the drink, specific drink, because they had one alcohol drink for each celebration, was absinthe. One of these days, if I only drank still. I missed that one. Never had that. Then we go to December 21st with Albanachtan, which is the winter solstice. Now, this was the rebirth of the sun. So it's the shortest day of the year, switching to now the days are starting to get longer. We don't necessarily appreciate that because the days still, they get longer by a minute or 2 every day. But that is the shifting from the darkness to the light. The custom is Yule logs, Christmas tree, holy, Hy-Vee, kissing under the mistletoe, and the ringing of bells. That all came from them. So what are we left with? Anything new or specific to our tradition? Not much, really. We literally took whatever they had. We're like, this is fun. Let's do that too. Right? There was, of course, the singing of songs, which I'll cover in a bit. The symbol is the pine branch, staghorn, or mistletoe. And the food was white cake to represent the delight of coming back, bitter herbs, mints, and juniper mead. The incense was pine, cedar, juniper. Now, why do you think it was such strong incense? You have to be practical. They didn't wash very much. Mm-hmm. And after being, inside in the cold weather for quite some time, strong incense helped disperse the bad smells. Yeah, sometimes, the simplest answer is the right answer. Now, we go to February 1st, Imbolc. It's called the Candle Festival. It's interesting because the sun is rebirthing itself starting December 21st, but by February 1st, it's the middle of winter. We have only reached middle of winter. So to bring hope, they would light candles, and they would keep them burning from dusk till dawn. It ends the tradition of the burning candle in the window. That's where it comes from. And also there could be a ceremony of the relighting of the earth, the fireplace. Yeah. So the symbol is a single flame, and the food was preserved dried goods and canned foods. And I don't know what possessed them, but they would burn seaweed incense. That could only have reeked. I can't imagine seaweed smelling good, but they would then drink midwinter musa. I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it before, but that's the drink that they would make with whatever was available, right? And then we're on to March 21st. What is March 21st? Come on. March 21st. Spring. Yeah, so they're celebrating spring now because they celebrate midwinter, and now winter's finally over, so they all come out and play. It's called the Birds Festival. During that day, they would celebrate the becoming of spring by watching birds. And that would be, and depending on the number of birds they would be spotted, predictions would be made on what kind of summer and harvests they would get. So they were very, very, very determined to find as many birds as they could. So it was an entire day thing. And hence why at Easter, which is in springtime, we have the chick and eggs. They would go looking for the chicks and the eggs. So if you ever wondered, where does the chicken have anything to do with Easter? It doesn't have anything to do with Jesus per se. It has to do with a pagan cultural thing. The symbol were rabbits, chicken, swallows, and coloring eggs. You would then, for the food, there was light food, fish, maple sugar candy, which I thought very interesting because I didn't think that maple grew there, but I guess it must if they're going to have maple sugar candy. Unless this was a modern addition added to it, I'm not sure. But sweet candies, sweet breads, and eggs. So very sweet time. So, and what do we do at Easter spring? We have the chocolate and candy. So all of our traditions are that old, and they come from pagans. The incense is lavender or narcissus. Now, again, narcissus is what's growing in the spring. So they would use what they could find. They didn't have stores, yeah? So they would use the correct items for the correct season and eat the food that is in season. All of these vibrationally are adjusting you to be in that period. Then for Beltane on May 1st, May 1st is the Thin Veils. So it would be a nighttime celebration, right? So that you could see the ghosts and talk to them and communicate to and get some wisdom or guidance for the summer or the year to come. The symbol was the maypole, daffodils and bright flowers. It was the first day of summer, May 1st. So our summer starts in June. But for them, their calendar was slightly different and their summer started May 1st. The custom was, you're going to love this, sexual license amongst peasants. Like I said before, they would jump over the fires that they built and then they would have fun. They'd celebrate going outside, having washed in the spring before May 1st celebration. Everybody smelled good. Everybody was happy. And they would erect a maypole. Now, everything was I did use that word on purpose. Everything, it was symbolism. And what did they do on May 1st with the maypole? They impaled the earth, right? Impregnated. It was a fertility festival. Part of them having this sexual liberties in the fields was to bring about this energy of fertility to the land. Now, they loved wearing green on that occasion. The food was sweet and sugar product, heather meat, cakes, cookies, no meat, and fruit. Now, it's interesting. Why would there be no meat? Because there hasn't been any fruit, and you know, the most likely produce was getting low. So what have they been mostly eating for the last bit of this before the crops come in is a lot of meat. And so in order to balance their bodies, they would reduce now the meat intake to balance for all the protein they had, and then try to give their body what it hasn't had for some time. It's very lovely the way the tradition respected that, you know, there's only so much available, but then we can balance it with our bodies. So our bodies all get the nutrients that they need at the right time of the year. And if you're going to eat an apple fresh, it has a lot more nutrient than if you try to eat an apple 6 months later, right? So they would get more out of the fruits and the veggies or the grains by eating them in season while everything was fresh, as opposed to eating old stale stuff. It's logical, right? So the incense was lilac and apple blossom. Again, making a lot of sense. That's what's available at that time of the year. And the drink is Beltane mead. And I have actually a recipe, but you know I don't like encouraging people to drink, so I don't share the recipes for the alcohol. I actually have the recipes. I could technically make it for every season, every festival. Then it's Midsummer Day. So now we're celebrating the June 21st, so it's midsummer. It's already midsummer. Can you think about that? Us, we're like, oh, summer's here, June 21st, and it's actually already midway. It's called the Oak Festival, and because it's the longest day of the year, the customs is to leap over oak wood fire, fairy hunting, and rites of inspiration. The rites of inspiration is, again, another quest that the apprentice would do. So there's one on Samhain, and there's one on Albanethin. Picking of the sacred sun flora. This was a special flower that was used in almost any medicine created by the Druids. So the more you could pick, the more medicine you could make. And it was very, very interesting because it was like we put honey in everything we do, you know? So a drop of honey, that's all that would be required to change the taste, to make it a little bit less sour or easier to drink, or adds the taste, whatever. So was this thing. The food was oak wine, fresh spring vegetables, light breads, and new cheese. Again, no meat. The incense would be oak mixed with mistletoe, St. John's wort, and wild red rose. And it was midsummer wine. Now, in Lug Nasad on August 1st, now we've already been, now it's the end of summer, yes? That's the grain festival. And the custom, and that's a time for games, competition, feasting, temporary marriage of 1 year and a day. Everybody's shocked in the room. Before you would have children, before you would have children, you would do a 1 year and a day to try it out. And if after 1 year and a day, you're still together and you still intend to stay together, then you would have an actual marriage, and then the children would come. So ends the tradition of the engagement. We get engaged, but do people actually go to the extent that these people did to make sure that they're compatible? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But it was a 1 year and a day, so you couldn't get married until a year and a day later. Interestingly enough, next week, if you tune in, we will talk more about these trial marriage before having children in different other cultures. So the team competition, spear tossing, fencing, wood sports. So what do we get out of this? The men are showing off. Yeah. And it's the time for the 1 year and 1 day fasting. sorry, not fasting, but binding. So, if she had any doubt and you're the winner of 3 games, well, now all of a sudden you're like a peacock going around the village, and she might say yes. You guys are laughing, but that's literally what it was for. The symbol is wheat stalks, loaves of bread, a spear, golden pipes, or a sickle. The food that it would eat would be grain bread, poultry, and fish. Again, not meat yet, but poultry and fish. Grilled cakes, oatmeal, cookies, early corn, and strawberries. So basically, for the entire summer, they don't eat meat. They don't eat fish. They don't eat poultry. They'll have enough of that the rest of the year around. The incense is golden pipes, marigold, sunflower, oat straw. And then we go to September 21st at Alben Elft. That's the festival of wine. Now we can only imagine what that looks like. Coincidentally, it's right after harvest, right? By September 21st, everything should have been harvested in by then. And so people have come together, they've worked the field, and now they're celebrating all their hard labor they've done all summer. And it's the autumnal equinox. So the custom is the harvest feast, the picking ripe products, the late corn, the stock bundling, the fishing, grape harvesting, and the new wine pressing. That's when all the girls get their short skirts and go step on those grapes, and yeah, stuff happens. The incense is warm wood, nightshade, again ghost flower, and the food is red wine, wild game. So now they're starting to hunt. Squash, melon, vine food, rich vegetable breads, cakes, and stew. So it's important because we to this day still hunt in the fall. And they're starting to introduce venison now. They respected the cycles of nature so that they wouldn't decimate their groups of elks or deers or whatever, right? There's a time to hunt if you don't want to interfere with reproduction. You don't want to kill a doe that has a baby. You don't, and they already knew all that from observing nature. It's a very witness culture. It's a culture that spent time observing things, spend time detaching from situation and trying to see how is that going to go. And does it go this way every time? That requires a lot of observation. So a lot of the times the apprentice Druids had to spend days and weeks observing what happens. How does this work? So in correlation to the medicine wheel that we have in the Native American tradition, we have colors associated to the directions. And each corner of this wheel has the same association, interesting enough, in the Druid culture. In the East, what's the color of the East? Yellow. Yeah. Yellow for air, yellow for sunshine. The sun rises for new beginning. It's also in the Druid culture associated high on the mountain for birds to fly. And in the native culture is the eagle who flies. It's raising above the bog and the difficulties. It's also the only addition that they have there. In the native tradition, we have a totem animal. In the Druid, they have a fairy or a sylph. They're adding their elementals to it. And they add an instrument. We have a weapon that we have in the directions that we surrender and we obtain a gift. In the Druid culture, their gift is a flute. In the native culture, the eagle gives you a song. The similarities are like uncanny. Yeah. You can't tell me after I'm going to do all 4 directions that, it's more than coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all. In the South, what's the color to the South? Red for fire. And with the Druids, it's the same thing. They burn incense there, and it's associated to the drake, the salamander, so the dragon, the fire elemental. And the musical instruments, the horn. What does the horn do? Why would you blow a horn?
Communication.
Huh?
Communication.
Communication. You're blowing the horn to gather people. That's literally the purpose of a horn, is to sound the alert or gather people. And what is Coyote doing in the south direction of the native people? He brings us together around the fire to talk. And he teaches us how to communicate with each other. And then we move it. That they're smiling in the room. I hope you're smiling too. In the West, the color for the natives is black. However, it's the black bear, but he's the guardian of the water. And I was explaining in the shamanism course this weekend that sometimes they use black because they didn't have anything to make the color blue, right? So those colors will vary a little bit depending on if the culture had, and they had blue in Ireland. So they colored it blue. It's also water, and it's associated to the mermen or merfolk and the undine. Undine is a lady that comes out of water and sheds her skin and becomes human. And if you capture the skin, you then control her. Beautiful legend. So it's about lakes and wells being protected. And the musical instrument is the harp. So again, many, many similarities with the native shamanic medicine wheel. In the north, there's often depicted in the native culture as the mountain because it's the earth. And the color is white because the peak of the mountain is white. But if we go to Ireland, there's not a whole lot of mountain peak. Yeah? Yeah. And what's the color of the earth there? Green. So therefore, their color is green. It's associated to their geographical area. But other than that, it's about salty bread, the salt of the earth, really being connected to that, and the valleys and caves. In the South American wheel, this is the place of elders and ancestors who reside inside the cave, who are deep beneath the earth. So we're linking many of these different medicine wheels together. And the person you would call to the north for help is the elf or the gnomes. So that's the difference. The main difference is that in North America, you will call the eagle, the coyote, the bear, and the buffalo. In South America, you call the energy of the women, the energy of the inner child, the energy of the male, and the energy of the ancestors. And in the Druid culture, you will call on the fairies, on the salamanders, on the merman, mermaid, merfolk, or the elves and gnomes. But in each direction, it is recognized that it has a dominion and it has a specific helper, someone who's close to being able to help you with the element of that direction, with the teachings of that direction. So we don't just have the time of the year, we also have the directions on the earth. So very grounded culture. And I've done all that. So now the music, because you've noticed it's a horn, it's a flute, it's the harp, and it's the last instrument was, I forgot to write it down, I'm sorry. So it's the use of the different instruments because it's all tied to music. So in the early spring, I did a talk on numerology, which explained frequency, which explains the nature of energy. So if you have questions on that specifically, just go watch that podcast or that video. The Druids, because they received this information from Pythagoras from Greece, also believe the frequencies were extremely important. And the best way to distribute a frequency was through music. So these times of gatherings and of singing and of listening was key. And that's why there was always one bard and everyone else was quiet. It wasn't a sing-along thing. Because then you'd have discordant voices, not everybody would hear the right tones and the right noise, and it would undo the frequency that you're trying to achieve inside your body. So the bards would travel all the way through the land, and they would often be like the mailmen as well. They would bring news from the other places or gifts from different, let's say a girl marries and goes to that village, and then she'd send something to mom or dad or whatever through the barn. So they're always very welcome at all the festival, but also very, very well, highly regarded and trusted. This is why they could carry messages, tokens, and gifts from one place to the other. The song for Beltane on May 1st is called Lilwynhorn. The American, or no, not the American, but the English name for it is the Ash Grove. And if when I was preparing for this, I listened to all these songs because the Ash Grove, that doesn't mean anything to me. Yet the second the song started playing, I was like, oh, I know that song. And unfortunately, because of copyrights and copyrights infringement, I can't play even a bit of it on these Facebook and YouTube videos because then my volume will get shut down. So please, YouTube has huge selections of them. Try to go for what would be more associated to traditional and no words. The original songs had no words. So you're looking for the instrumental versions of these songs. So the Ash Grove would be for Beltane. It is a beautiful song about the awakening of spring. So it's very lively. It makes your heart flipper, you know. So while you're listening to it, I encourage you to actually try to really close your eyes, be in the moment of the song, and see, what does that make me feel like? And those would be the song to listen to around the time of May 1st to realign your energy to the transformation of the planet. Now, if that sounds weird, remember, I do a regular cleansing every year just before Easter, which is about the same time as Lent in the Christian calendar. It's 45 days where I fast while eating only fruits and vegetables, and we avoid sugar, meat, corn, alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, caffeine. So why do we do that at that particular time of the year? We do that because that's the time that the earth is cleansing itself and it's regrowing. So the time of the energy is the time that calls for this type of cleansing. Interestingly enough, talking to someone from Australia, we discussed that for them, being on the complete other side of the planet, that time is probably the fall for them, when their spring comes. Mm-hmm. So calculating these dates in accordance, and they're going to be trying it this fall to see the difference on how easier was the process if instead of doing it at a certain date, to doing it in accordance of the intention behind it. I don't know how many times I can say this. I always speak about intent, right? What is your intent? And then from your intent, you can grow what you want. Having the right intent, but the wrong energies will make this harder, harsher, more difficult. So this song was to prepare you for this awakening with the beginning of the season. The next one is called Green Sleeves. Everybody goes, So it's for midsummer, June 21st. And of course, being point French, I don't know any of these English names. So until I listened to the actual songs, they meant nothing to me. And I'm listening to it, and my friend was here, Chris, and she's like, "Oh, that's Green Sleeves." And I'm like, "How do you know that?" But the song, we all know this song. So even if the title means nothing to you, I encourage you to pop in and putting this in. And I had no difficulty finding any of these songs on YouTube, so it's going to be really easy. Now, for August 1st, for Luc Nassad, the name of the song is Kramen Kyan, and it's O Fili e Fila. Okay, it's Latin. O space Fili, F-I-L-I-I, space E-E-T, File, F-I-L-A-E. Again, this is sung usually by monks It's become a very traditional song for choirs in church, which is very interesting, and absolutely beautiful song, really moving song. And Danny Boy is September 21st, Elak. So the original name is Elak, but for you guys to find it on YouTube, although you might still find it under these original names, Danny Boy is the easiest way for me to, when I tried looking for these songs. And it's about the dying, of going to sleep for the winter. And now this song makes sense, yeah? For the October 31st, November 1st, Samhain time, it's the space-altering effect of that specific time of the year. And the original song's name is Kant Khan, and in English is Hi Ho, Nobody Home. Which is funny, right? Because it's literally, you're not home because you're on the other side of the veil, and you're a ghost, so you don't have a body. And so now we can see the humor behind these words of the representation of the original value of these songs. For midwinter, December 21st, we have Hardhit Inos, all through the night calling the sun. So that's the calling of waking up the sun. I think that of all the song's name, it's the one that's the closest to what it actually.
That's what it's called, the calling of waking.
Oh yeah, all through the night calling the sun. Yeah. Now, the one that shocked me the most. Now I've heard Danny Boy, and it is an Irish song, so I'm okay with that so far. But the one that shocked me the most was with the February 1st midwinter song, Ken Corn. King Karn, the name of the song is now called the Urine Carol. The Urine is a native group in Quebec, near living Quebec City. The Urine Carol. It's a burial song of burying the winter, saying we've had enough, and it's time for us to get out of the deep, dark night. It's a beautiful, amazing song. And on YouTube, it was available in English, French, and native. So you kind of hear the songs 3 times, but in the 3 different tongues. And so if you find that one on YouTube, that's the one I recommend. That was the most beautiful one.
Huron.
Huron. Huron. Carol. As a Christmas carol. And finally, for the return of spring in March 21st, we have the prayer for the Breton fishermen. So we just went all over the world right there. So the prayer for the Breton fishermen is the title of it in English, and it was called Ailia Tiden. So all of these were part of the celebration, the readjustment of your frequency to align yourself with the changes that the earth was going through, to facilitate you being able to cope with the changes of light, changes of food, changes of everything. Now, we're going to move into the healing area for the Druids, which was a very, very important part of their lives, right? So we remember we have 3 groups, and one specific group was the Bards, which was all related to the singing, but we also have the other Druids, which were as much political as they were healing. There was no differentiation there. The only differentiation was from the Bard to the other ones. And they had 16 healing herbs, which are divided into 4 groups. They're divided into earth, air, water, and fire. Depending on what the problem was, they would dilute some of these plants to a certain degree, depending on the gravity of the illness and how chronic it was. The standard rule was 1 drop for every 10 pounds of body weight every 3 hours. So very much a homeopathic remedy, okay? They were transformed often, the plants were dried up and carried in little pouch inside of the Druid sash, and they were then steeped in hot water. And sometimes, depending on the illness, were either water-based or alcohol-based. If we think of modern medicine, a lot of the cold medicine has alcohol in it, yeah? There's a reason for that, because some medicine needs to be suspended in alcohol for it to be effective. And so they already knew that. hundreds of years ago. The additional medicine herb, the mistletoe, was added to all remedy, and the alternative name for mistletoe is all heal, as in will heal everything. And alone, mistletoe is used for vertigo, dizziness, headaches, heart problems, palpitation, high blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, and nerve disease. One plant. Now, was that the way it was distilled? Was it distilled in water and alcohol? And how many drops of mistletoe per water? Those are the reason I know these things, but the reason why I'm not sharing it is because I don't want people to start mixing those things and taking those things instead of their regular medicine. And so I'm not going to go there. I'm just saying that the use of the plants, and you will see, and it relates a lot to the issues they had back then. But I'm sure that if we would have continued to this day, there possibly plants would have increased, or the use of the plants would have adapted to the new issues that we're developing today, which is, depression, anxiety, stress, and all those things, right? But living in accordance to nature and being more balanced with the cycle of nature allowed us to not have these issues. It's just the way we lead our lives now are completely detached from all of that. And so especially with what we experience and being confined, I feel like I'm let out of jail every time we go for a walk. And I'm like, yay, freedom, green, sunlight. So respecting the cycle of nature and honoring these vibrations was key to not having a lot of the illnesses that we have to struggle with today. The earth medicine. Now, what is the earth, the fire, the air have anything to do with it? It had to do with the type of disease. Some disease were considered more air disease. Those you would think lungs and things like that. Earth. So you'll see. Valerian was a sedative, and we know that's what valerian does. Cramps, pain, and cough. Skullcap was all nervous conditions. So, nervousness, anxiousness, and they were on battlefields. They were fightings. They were fights. They were reason for them to have post-traumatic stress and all these other things. So that would be one of the ones that could be used. It's also against fever and what's called a refrigerant, meaning if you're really running hot, that would cool you down. The lady slipper was good for indigestion, headaches, and again, nerves, calming your nerves. And wormwood, which is absentee, by the way, was good for digestion, liver, gallbladder, wormwood, externally for insect bites, sprain, rheumatism, and bruises. So all I know of absentee is that it's a altering consciousness substance, but that's because people drank it, by the glass, right? But remember, the way that it used to be administered was one drop for every 10 pounds of your body, right? So you can get drunk on that stuff, even though it was alcohol-based. Their alcohol consumption was quite different than, what we might see today in bars and other places. Now, the air family was chamomile family, and that was for stomach aches, digestion, and gas. So you can see the air component there. Calming you for insomnia in children. So chamomile was good for the children. And what do we have to calm ourselves? We have chamomile tea. Okay. It was good for eye wash, open sores, and the kidneys. So a good purification process inside the body. Then there's calendula, which was for treat external sores, burns, bleeding, hemorrhoids, wound, and mixed in with oil. It was for earaches and vaginal infection. So it couldn't be pure, and it couldn't be mixed in water. It had to be mixed with oil in this one. Yarrow was for internal bleeding, gas, diarrhea, fevers, measles, colds, flu, and an antiseptic. And vervain, which for some of us with fantasy backgrounds, is what's keeping the vampires at bay. It was good for cold, flu, coughs, upper respiratory inflammation, insomnia, pneumonia, and asthma. So again, air had to do with all the breathing related disease. Yes. Now water was good for the plants for catnip, and it had to do with digestion, stomach ache, cramps, calmative effects on children. It was excellent on children. So not just for cats, apparently. Fevers, headaches, bronchitis, and diarrhea. Hops was a sleeping aid and a liver and digestive aid for gas and cramp. And externally, it was an antibiotic for boils, tumors, swelling, and skin inflammation because it cools. Hops cools, right? So black willow was for pain, fevers, arthritis, kidney and bladder trouble, antiseptic, gargle, tonsillitis. So you can see that the issues had a lot to do with digestion, mostly, right? And then cuts and burns and fevers. And echinacea was an antibiotic. It stimulates, how is it an antibiotic? It stimulates the immune system. And it was good for abscesses in teeth and body, lymph swelling, and digestive aid as well. And finally, I believe, fire. Fire was the medicine to the opposite of the fever, right? So all the refrigerant was if you had a fever. Now it's the opposite. You can't stay warm, so you're taking these to warm yourself up. So you have the golden seal, which was an antibiotic, and any problems regarding the eyes, the female infections, sore, skin condition, cold, virus, and infection. So something that had to be more burned than, yes. St. John's wort, nerves, bedwetting, liver tonic, insomnia. Decocted in oil for 2 weeks, it was used for tumors. Any skin condition, wounds, ulcers, burns, enlarged gland, bruises, and muscular pain. So a rubbing thing, right? The buckthorn was for constipation, laxative, digestive stimulant, gas, liver, gallbladder stones. So yeah, I just want to make a parallel with St. John's wort. When we rub ourselves with the whatever cream you buy because you have an injury or you have rheumatoid arthritis or your muscles ache, you want it to be warm, right? And that's what St. John's wort is part of the fire medicine. It does warm. And finally, the white oak was used for internal bleeding, vaginal infection. It was the most effective antiseptic for wounds and skin condition. And it was also used for insect bites, hemorrhoids, swollen glands, tumors, poison oak and ivy, lymphatic swelling, varicose vein, and it was a mouthwash for gum problems. Yes. Now, why was this so important? Why were Druids would spend an entire lifetime of learning all these things, how to make all these mixture, and then travel from village to village? I think that's the only difference between a shaman in a village. There would be a shaman in the village, as opposed to the Druid culture, where the Druids were to travel from one place to the next. They were traveling. They had no fixed home. Or if they did, they lived in isolation. They lived retreated from the people. In a way, that meant that they had no favorites. They didn't favor one village over the other. So if they voted for someone, if they made someone in charge or as a war chief, it was done based on their merit and not because they had been friends or from that village or lived there. The goal of the Druid was that they dedicated their lives to the spiritual evolution of themselves. And they believed that that could only be achieved by community work. So dedicating your life to others. In order to be able to do that, you had to learn to rise above the flesh. And the Druids were known to be celibates. And the reason why they wore white robes is because they represented the light. They were light workers. They were the day. They were the bringer of hope. And they believed that they would find their apprentice in their travels. They would, through observation, would find the right person to train. And then that child had to leave home and follow them. So it wasn't because the Druid is moving from place to place. Part of their learning took place in their travels, how to gather the herbs, how to mix the herbs. And that's what the Druids, the Druids meditating, the Druids knowledge, the songs, everything is being passed and could not be passed while the Druid would stay in one place for 20 years to teach those things. So a child who was identified as a possible apprentice had to leave home and start this journey very young of traveling from one place to the other. Once in a while, on the festival days, would then be reunited with other apprentices. And that was the only time they had. And usually not to play, but to go through one of their quests of mastery. But they would do it together as a rite of passage. Now, we have a lot more information about the Druids, their different practices and their different rites, but that's going to be saved for the group who's coming to Ireland with me next September 2021. Yay! They will learn these rites, and they will learn to apply them on site at the different Ireland sites. For more information about the trip to Ireland, you're just going to look up at the website, www.sonyaroy.com, sonyaroy.com. All the information is there. We have a few spots left, although they are filling up. So if you're interested and you have questions about the trip itself, I encourage you to email me, text me, or call me. If you have, however, we have a few minutes left, any question in regards to the talk tonight, any clarification that you'd like to have, please, now is the time. So we have people watching online in YouTube and Facebook. So if you have questions, please go ahead. Anybody in the room? Yes?
Were the apprentices given the option of not being an apprentice?
Once an apprentice was identified, it was very much, their free will was very much respected. However, they only had a certain amount of time to choose if they would or would not become apprentices, because the formation and the year were extremely important. So, I doubt that. What I know is that they would have most likely identified the child by the time he was 3 or 4, but would not invite them on the quest by the time until he was 7. That's when the invitation would come. They had to be old enough to understand, to learn, and before that, they didn't see the point in taking the child away from their mother. However, the child would. It was a really highly regarded position, and it was a very adventurous life. We look at it, oh my gosh, you're away from family, you're away from home, and yet. Just think about for the longest time, every family had to have a nun or a priest because that was super important. That was give you standing in community and gave you some power and stuff. Having a child that would go as a Druid, there was something special about that child. So you weren't seeing it as a loss. You were seeing it as, wow, my child. But then you would lose all right to that child. Yeah.
Were they all male?
Yes, Druids were male. The equivalent, and I don't talk about this now because we're going to have an entire series on the sacred feminine. I'm honoring the sacred feminine with an entire series of talk on the different sacred feminine of all over the planet. Just to give them their proper standing. So the equivalent of the Druids was the Sisters of Babylon. And so they were balancing, and the separation was really in the honoring of the men are doing this and the women are doing that. So as much as the men traveled, the women all stayed in Avalon. As much as the men lived alone and by themselves, all the women came together. And they were keepers of wisdom, but they were keepers of the sacred feminine. And so they honored the sacred feminine and its wisdom by the way they lived and the way they gathered. So that'll be one of the future talks we're going to have. All right. So if we don't have any more questions, I don't see any. I must have been really clear on YouTube and Facebook. But anybody else in the room wants to know anything before I turn it off? We're good. So the last one of this series is next week. we're talking about the 7 sacred flames and the ascended masters, and we're going to start entering the knowledge of the people living under the earth in the 5th dimensional space. So please feel free to join us for this wonderful time and opportunity to learn about the 5th dimension and the rituals that we can start to make ourselves prepared for the ascension of the planet. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I was gonna say.